Hey, and welcome to my channel. I hope you're doing well. Today is April 23 and we are gonna talk about oil prices. So it's important that we keep that date in mind because when you watch this video a lot of things could have happened. But I want to analyze why the oil prices are not higher. I think the current oil prices not at all reflect the geopolitical reality and the supply shock we are now experiencing. But let's jump straight into it. So the first point to talk about is naturally the Strait of Hormuz, everybody's favorite strait, where everybody now can point it out on a map and know where the strait is. So before the war, it transported approximately 20% of the global oil supply, which translates to 20 million barrels of oil products each and every day. During the hot part of the conflict, it got reduced to approximately 10 million barrels per day. So the supply shock was about 10% then of the global market. A lot of oil managed to find other ways. For example, the United Arab Emirates have a pipeline that do not cross the strait. So they could get out about 1.5 million barrels that way. Iran could keep on exporting its oil because the US let it pass. So another 1.5 million barrels. And then Saudi Arabia had an east-west going pipeline that comes out in Yanbu. It has the capacity of 7 million barrels of oil per day, but the loading capacity in Yanbu is reported to be only around 4.5. So that meant that about 10 million barrels of oil found other ways to get out of the strait. But after the failed negotiation in Islamabad, when they crashed, now the blockade was back on the Iranian side, and the US did an interesting countermove and put up their own blockade, blockading the blockade, so to say. So now the Iranian export is not flowing anymore. And according to some oil market researchers, now the shortfall is approximately 13 million barrels of oil per day. Let's put that into an historical context. So here I put up a nice graph. And the reason I like this very much is that it's adjusted for inflation. And it helps to explain why I think the oil prices currently do not reflect reality. As we can see, the graph goes all the way back to the 1970s with the Yom Kippur War or the oil embargo and the Iran Revolution. And we can see that, for example, during the Iran Revolution and the early 80s, the oil prices adjusted for inflation were higher than they currently are. And this is despite that the supply shortfall is lower. During the Iran Revolution, it's estimated that the global supply was about 4% less, even though prices reacted with 150%. Currently, in the Israel-US war with Iran, as I said, it's estimated that 13 million barrels of oil per day is not getting or not reaching the global market. And so far, the price response has only been less than 50%. But wait, there is more. The war in Ukraine is still ongoing, and with the new higher oil prices, Ukraine naturally do not want Russia to earn a lot of money on their oil export, so they have attacked the exporting facilities in both the Baltic and the Black Sea, which limit naturally the ability for Russia to export its oil. Reuters reported that about 40% of Russian oil exportability was closed. But the big question is for how long? If it's only for a week or so, doesn't affect the market that much. But if the Ukrainians repeatedly attack and the oil terminals are closed for a longer period of time, that means that the world is losing another 3 to maybe even 4 million barrels of oil in addition to what's happening in the Gulf. So why are we not in the full panic mode? I think we should be, because the situation is not easy at all. But there are a couple of good reasons why the full panic mode hasn't set in yet. The most important is probably that the oil market was oversupplied before the conflict started. The International Energy Agency said that it was an overproduction of about 2 million barrels per day. That meant that storages were full, including floating storages, which is another name for tankers looking for buyers that were out on the oceans. So when the conflict started, supply got tight, there were all these low-hanging fruits of tankers that could be bought, especially after Trump dropped the sanctions on Iran and Russian oil. So these oil tankers and their cargo could easily be snapped up by refineries and buyers who needed it, which put a downward pressure on the prices. In addition, there was a huge release of strategic oil reserves, 400 million barrels. It's currently now trickling out to the market, which naturally also puts a downward pressure. And then I think it's worth mentioning that our economy is not as dependent on oil anymore as we used to be in the 70s and 80s, where oil was used including for generating electricity. We don't do that anymore. Now it's more about moving stuff and creating plastic. So that insulates the economy slightly. Still an extraordinary important input, of course, but a little bit less at least. And the most important part, I believe, for the low prices is the communication strategy from Donald Trump. That he constantly points out that this is going to be a short war, and the market reacts accordingly. Meaning that they price oil as the war would soon be over and the strait will open. I hope they are right. Because it should, as many researchers has pointed out, there is now a big difference between what's called the oil futures. Those are the oil prices you see on your economic news, which are now hovering around $100 per barrel, and what Bloomberg named ASAP oil, which means a refinery is looking for oil here and now. Those prices are significantly higher. We're talking 20-30% higher, which reflects that supply is tight. If you want oil now, you have to pay a premium. But the market do believe that in a couple of months' time, there will be ample of supply. Hence the price difference. So the panic is not full on yet, but it sure has started. And Asian countries are on the front line here because they were mostly supplied by the Persian Gulf. We have now analyzed the current situation. We have given some historical context in regards to the oil price. Now I think it's time to try to draw some kind of conclusions. One conclusion from me is that the oil price currently is reflecting the best case scenario. The best case scenario is that Israel, Iran, and the US all hug it out. They agree to be best friends. They negotiate in Islamabad for a couple of weeks, and then business returns to normal. Naturally, the oil markets would respond very positively to this. Prices would fall. I do think that they might tick up a little bit after the initial fall. The reason for that is insurance costs would be high. It takes time to ramp up the pressures in the wells that has been turned off. Some oil infrastructure has been damaged. And we also have oil tankers now spread all over the world trying to find supply. And for the supply chains to go back to normal will take many months. And during these months, we will see a higher oil price. This best case scenario seems to not take into account that there are a lot of thorny issues that need to be solved. To just mention a couple, the enriched uranium, how will that be handled? Sanctions against Iran, will they be dropped? Is Lebanon going to be included in this negotiation, so to say? Iran is insisting on it. Israel is insisting that it should not. And this is just to mention a couple of them. So unfortunately, I think this best case scenario is a bit over-optimistic and probably not the most likely. If nothing else, negotiation will take, I think, we more need to calculate in months than in weeks. But I hope I'm wrong. I do hope the best scenario comes, that the conflict does not return to a hot conflict again, and that we can find a conclusion to this. That would be best for all. But it's very optimistic to believe that right now. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe if you learned something. Until next time, all the best. Bye.